Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the Wizard Vyr's Amazing Arcana set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses so we'll know how to gear out our character. This set revolves around the Archon skill. When you cast it, you enter an alternative form and receive a new set of skills, replacing the ones on your skill bar for a 20-second duration. While in this Archon form, anytime you hit with an ability or kill a monster, you gain a stack of the Archon buff. You can get an endless amount of these stacks, and with each one, you gain more damage output and toughness. With the set bonuses, Archon has a 100-second cooldown, and since our damage relies so heavily on this skill, we will want to be in Archon form as much as possible. Therefore, cooldown reduction will be the main priority for the gearing and skill setup. In this setup, we are using 5 of the 6 set pieces in the shoulders, torso, hands, legs, and feet slots. In the head slot, we have Leoric's Crown, providing some increased cooldown reduction with a diamond equipped. In the waist slot, we have Fazula's Improbable Chain, which provides free Archon buff stacks when entering Archon form. This belt makes completing one of the dungeon objectives much easier, and it is not recommended to attempt the dungeon without it. In the wrist slot, we have Warzekian Arm Guards, which provide an occasional small movement speed increase. In the main hand and offhand slots, we take the 2-piece set items Chentoto's Will and Chentoto's Force, which add a couple of passive damage increasing mechanics. The main benefit is that every second while in Archon form, a wave of destruction will emanate outwardly from you in all directions, damaging enemies near you. This weapon set will make the dungeon much easier to complete, and it is not recommended to attempt the dungeon without it. In the next slot, we have a Hellfire Amulet. There are several additional passive skills that are beneficial for completing the dungeon. Take anything offering additional damage output, toughness, or mobility. In one of the finger slots, we have Halo of Carini, which provides a significant toughness increase when using Storm Armor. Without this ring, you may not have enough toughness to survive the dungeon. And in the other finger slot, we have Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, which provides some beneficial cooldown reduction to enable casting Archon form more often. When it comes to rerolling stats on the gear, the top priorities are cooldown reduction as mentioned previously, and then get anything that offers a damage output increase. For Kanai's Cube in the weapon slot, we have Unstable Scepter, which buffs the damage of Arcane Orb. We will be taking this skill to deal damage while outside of Archon form. In the armor slot, we take the Swami, which extends the duration of the Archon buff stacks after Archon form has expired. It is not recommended to attempt this dungeon without these first 2 legendary powers. You may not have enough damage output to complete the dungeon in time without them. And in the jewelry slot, we have Ring of Royal Grandeur, which allows us to gain the 6-piece set bonus while only having 5 of the 6 set pieces equipped. For gems, we have a diamond in the head slot for cooldown reduction, topazes in the torso and leg slots, and an emerald in the weapon slot. For legendary gems, we have Bane of the Powerful, Bane of the Trapped, and Zay's Stone of Vengeance, all for increased damage output. For Paragon, the main priorities are movement speed and cooldown reduction. Next, let's go over the skills. We'll be using Archon, which is the focal point for the set. The rune choice doesn't matter, since the 2-piece set bonus provides the effect of every rune. Next, we have Arcane Orb, which is our damage dealing skill outside of Archon form. We take the Frozen Orb rune for its superior area damage coverage. This skill is a good fit for this dungeon because you can cast it and then keep moving while it's doing damage, and you can also spam several in a row when you need to pump out some bigger damage when it's needed, like on elite monsters. Next, we have Teleport with the Wormhole rune for some added mobility. Then, we have Storm Armor, which is needed in order to benefit from the toughness buff on the Halo of Carini ring. We take the Scramble rune for the run speed increase. Then we take Magic Weapon with the Force Weapon rune for a damage buff, and then Familiar with the Sparkflint rune for another damage buff. For the passive skills, we have Astral Presence for Arcane Power Generation. We don't have an Arcane Power Generator skill equipped in this build because we won't have much additional time to stand still and cast and still be able to complete the dungeon. Any Arcane Power Generation you can get will help you keep pumping out Arcane Orbs. Next, we take Power Hungry and Audacity, which both increase damage based on the distance you are from the monsters. And lastly, we have Evocation for increased cooldown reduction. Now, let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary dungeon objective is to reach 100 stacks of the Archon buff while in Archon form 3 different times. You gain stacks of the buff every time you hit monsters with Archon abilities or kill them. Archon form only lasts 20 seconds with each cast, so you'll want to make the most out of each one. Before you cast Archon, you'll first want to look for a larger pack of enemies so you can get a good jump start right at the beginning. When you first enter Archon form, you have no buff stacks for increased damage. So initially, you will want to use Disintegration Wave, the beam in the right click slot, to hit and kill monsters and start building up buff stacks. After you get a few stacks, you can switch to using Arcane Blast on the number 1 hotkey, which you can cast while running forward through monster packs, usually killing enemies in one hit. To get to 100 stacks within the duration, you'll then want to stick to the main pathways and focus on higher density packs of monsters. Keep moving into uncharted territory to ensure you're always encountering new monsters and not backtracking into sections you've already cleared. You'll want to avoid chasing after single enemies, saving them for after Archon form has expired. And don't try to kill elites unless you can drop them quickly, especially at the beginning of Archon form when you're low on buff stacks. They're too tough and you'll waste the precious few seconds you have available. Once Arcane has expired, then double back and kill off any stragglers you might have left behind, either inadvertently or purposely. You want to spend time out of Arcane form, clearing residual enemies, and focusing on any side rooms, saving most of the main paths and larger packs for Arcane form. Fazula's Improbable Chain Belt, which grants you free stacks of the Arcane buff, will make this objective much easier. You'll only need to gain 50 to 60 stacks of the buff on your own. The second primary dungeon objective is to kill 300 enemies while in Arcane form. You should be able to complete this objective without any extra effort. Just cast Arcane and kill enemies. Follow the same guidance, stick to the main pathways, and focus on higher density packs of monsters. Overall, the higher your damage output is, the less you'll have to worry about focusing on larger packs and reaching enough buff stacks to do significant damage. Also, having the Chantoto's Resolve weapon set equipped will make killing enemies during Arcane form even easier, allowing you to do significant damage passively as you walk through monsters at melee range, killing them in virtually one shot when combined with your own cast of Arcane Blast. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. This is a very non-linear dungeon. There's many variations of routes you can plan to take, but none of them matter, because due to the nature of the set playstyle, you will be following the ad hoc route that has the highest density monster packs in real time, which will be unique to every dungeon attempt. Instead of following a specific pre-planned route, we will instead focus on different general zones. After you enter the dungeon, you'll want to follow the outer perimeter and head to zone number 1. Before progressing deep into each successive zone after that, you will want to make sure the current zone you're working on is fully cleared. Depending on your damage output, you may not have enough time to make a second pass through the dungeon looking for stragglers. By focusing on these 4 general zones one at a time, it will help you make more structured progress. As you move through each zone, you'll be cycling through 3 basic steps. Step 1. Locate a starter pack prior to casting Arcane. You want a decent sized group of monsters so you can get a good jump start on Arcane buff stacks when you cast it. Next, in Step 2, cast Arcane and look for more large, high density packs of monsters. Only move through uncharted territory that you haven't uncovered on your minimap. During Arcane form, while you kill monsters, you'll be making progress toward both dungeon objectives, and focusing on larger packs will specifically make the first objective easier to complete. A good approach during this step is to try to mostly follow the outer perimeter, and only branch down interior hallways when they contain large packs of monsters, but only if they lead to unexplored areas so you can focus on getting that first primary dungeon objective completed first. Following the hallways in this fashion will ensure you're always encountering fresh new monsters without any downtime running through sections you've already cleared. Last, in Step 3, once Arcane form has expired after 20 seconds, you'll then leverage the legendary power of the Swami Helm, which extends the effect of the Arcane buff stacks for 20 additional seconds to continue killing monsters. Here, you'll want to kill off any residual enemies in areas you've already covered. Try to focus on single monsters or small groups, particularly in the interior hallways and side rooms, and avoid the outer perimeter where possible. However, you shouldn't hold back from killing anything in your path. Don't save monster packs for later if the cooldown on Arcane isn't close to being expired. There will be plenty of enemies in the dungeon to kill while in Arcane form. Once the bonuses from the Swami expire, then you'll likely have a few seconds of downtime before you can cast Arcane again. During this time frame, you'll repeat step number 1 and look for the next grouping to start Arcane with. While you wait, though you won't do much damage, you should continue casting Arcane Orb to help reduce the cooldown of Arcane through the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac legendary power. Throughout the dungeon, make sure you keep a vigilant eye on your minimap to spot any loose monsters on the other sides of walls. Remember, you can pass through walls with the teleport skill, saving you a lot of time. This is particularly helpful for zone number 4, which is riddled with several walls and oddly connected rooms. If you can't get into a certain room, that means the room is sealed off by a door that you'll first need to destroy. So now that you have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 3, then to the Rakkus Crossing waypoint. From there, head northeast and travel all the way to the end of the long passageway. In front of the portal to the edge of the abyss, there's a staircase to the left side. The dungeon entrance is located on the platform at the top of this staircase. And next, we'll look at the playthrough. For this run, I scaled in the gearing to demonstrate techniques. I had to equip the Unstable Scepter weapon, the Swami Helm, and the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac to ultimately have enough damage to complete the dungeon within the time limit. And I also had to equip the Halo of Perini Ring for the toughness benefit in order to survive. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you a much easier time completing the dungeon. Once inside the dungeon, cast your 3 buffs and head out to the first pack of monsters. Cast Arcane and start killing enemies with Disintegration Wave on right click. As you build up stacks, you can switch over to Arcane Blast on the number 1 hotkey. Keep moving forward looking for high density. We were able to get to 100 stacks. Taking down the elites is much easier when you have that many buff stacks. They can take a while to kill otherwise. After Arcane form is expired, we backtrack a bit to kill off enemies we skipped and check the interior hallways and side rooms of zone number 1. As Archon is coming off a cooldown, head back toward the outer perimeter and look for another pack to repeat the cycle. Skip small rooms and single monsters and focus on bigger packs only while Archon is active. We got to 100 stacks again for 2 out of 3 on the dungeon objective. Now backtrack and clear up the residual enemies in Zone 1. Remember that you can teleport through walls to save some time. As we finish clearing up Zone 1, we can now move ahead to the next area, knowing we won't have to come back here. We do very little damage without buff stacks, so start prepping the next group for the start of another Archon cast. While in Archon form, we stick to the outer perimeter to look for larger packs, entering Zone 3 instead of turning into the heart of Zone 2. There wasn't great density in that section, but we were able to get to 100 stacks for a third time. The first primary dungeon objective is complete. Since we're so deep into Zone 3, we just stay in this area to clean up residual enemies instead of trying to return to Zone 2 now. We have to adapt to whatever the dungeon gives us and just make a mental note to clear Zone number 2 later. With the first objective completed, now we can just purely focus on killing everything, but we do still want to be disciplined about the approach with Archon form and the steps to the cast sequence. And we somewhat quietly completed the second primary dungeon objective. You could see that Elite was going to take a couple of seconds to kill, so we just skipped it for now. Keep building up those stacks. And now he was much easier to take down. Without the benefit of the extended buff stack duration provided by the Swami Helm, this dungeon would be extremely difficult. We're done with Zone number 3, so now we head back to finish off Zone 2. The buff stacks are expired again. Group them up and go into Archon form. Zone 2 should be cleared, so now we head to Zone number 4. You'll notice you can move with the teleport skill during Archon form pretty frequently. Leverage this often to cover more ground, especially in Zone 4 with its many walls. You'll also notice you get a slow time spell while in Archon form. You can use it, but it's not overly helpful, so if you're having trouble managing all the skills, don't bother with it. Keep going after that monster density while you've got the buff stacks active. It is possible to shoot through the walls that have bars on them. Don't waste teleport jumping to the other side if you don't need to. This set dungeon becomes much easier the more items you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier in this guide. Without the right items or enough damage output, you're going to need a lot of skill to complete it. But with the right items, you will be able to just walk through and destroy everything easily. As mentioned earlier, I would not recommend attempting this dungeon without Fazula's belt, the Swami Helm, Chintoto's weapon set, and Halo of Karini equipped at a minimum. Just a few more monsters remaining. And we're done. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.